I'd like to take a few moments today and look at the subject of keeping spiritual blinders on ourselves. The Word of God's very clear that there are things that we're to keep our focus on, like the finish line, running the race, finishing the course. And there's things that we need to keep our focus off of as well. As I was reading 2 Timothy chapter 4, in verse number 10, Paul makes the statement, Demas has forsaken me, having loved this present world. Demas had been a co-worker, a co-laborer with Paul. He had worked with him. He had helped him. He had served alongside Paul for at least for some extended period of time. And now Paul, towards the end of his life, is writing this sad discourse that Demas has forsaken him because his attention was diverted on the present world. We don't know the specifics, but it doesn't matter. There's too many things in the world that can easily take our attention off of Christ, off of the ministry, and off of the things Christ has called us to do. We're reminded of that as well in the parable of the seed and the sower in Matthew chapter 13. The sower goes out and he throws his seed. Some of it falls on the hard ground, some among the stony ground, some among the thorns, but some among good ground, and it grows up and produces great fruit, great harvest. The third one there is the seed among the thorns, as Christ goes on to clarify exactly what he's talking about. In Matthew chapter 13, verse 22, Christ says that seed that grew up among the thorns flourished for a while, but then the lure of the riches and the cause of the world and the cares of the world choked it out, and it became unfruitful. We have to be so careful that we don't get distracted by things going on in the world. We could be easily distracted by materialism, by cares and concerns of what's going on in the world around us, and keep our eyes off of Christ. When we keep our eyes off of Christ, we, like Peter, who was walking on the water towards Christ, when he looks down and sees the waves and the turbulence around him, begins to sink. We need to keep our eyes on Jesus Christ and not be swayed by the cares and concerns of this world. Number two, not only do we have to watch out that we're not being, our focus isn't being taken away by looking at the world, but number two, we need to, I think we're too often find ourselves looking at others, what others are doing. Maybe others that are doing, from our perspective, are doing better than us. Somehow we think that they're more successful, or God has blessed them more, or something is more positive in their life. Maybe we think they have more talents, more gifts, more abilities. Yet God says our rule and our standard is not others. We're not comparing ourselves to others. We're not in a race where the first person across the finish line wins. God counts those that are faithful and those that cross the finish line as being those who are victorious in the Christian life. So sometimes we're distracted by those who we, at least from our perspective, we think they're doing better. Sometimes we're distracted by those that we think are doing worse. Maybe we're too often looking back, thinking, wow, that poor guy is really a mess, or that poor person, they really have problems, or look at them, they're not doing anything. And we start to vault ourselves up. Our pride begins to take over. We begin to look at ourselves in a more positive light than clearly what we're supposed to. Again, our standard is not other people. Our standard is not others' accomplishments. Our standard is Jesus Christ. He ran the race. He set the course before us. So we're too often looking at the world around us. Too often we're looking at others around us. I think number three, we're too often looking at problems that are around us. Colossians chapter 3, verse 2, set your affection on things above, not on things on the earth. And we start to get distracted by problems, a woe is me, pity party mentality, where we begin to look at problems and like, why has this happened to me? Why does everything bad happen to me? I've learned so quickly, I guess from my perspective as a pastor, that everybody has problems. Some people may be able to hide theirs better than others, or mask it better than others, or keep it quiet more than others. But everybody has a world of problems. Our perspective, our paradigm needs to change sometimes. Our paradigm, the perspective from which we're looking at things. I was looking for a valve for my compressor the other day in the garage. And the valve I needed to pump air into a tire. It had another attachment on the end of the compressor when I got there, and I was looking for the valve to put air into a tire that was deflated, and I couldn't find the valve, and I'd usually always set it on the same shelf, but I couldn't find it. I was looking, I spent some time looking, and finally there was a 5-gallon bucket sitting there full of whatever with a lid on it, and I stepped up on that bucket. It changed my height by about 14, 16 inches. And suddenly I saw the valve. It was on the shelf I thought it was. It had just rolled to the back behind some other things and down into a little groove in the back of the shelf there. And I just couldn't see it from the floor. When I changed my perspective, things looked totally different. I could find what I was looking for. So often we need to change our paradigm sometimes. We sit there and look around at other people or other things that are going on. We begin to think we're the only ones with problems or we're the only ones with trouble. Sometimes we need to change our perspective, our paradigm, a paradigm shift, to be able to look at what others may be going through and other struggles that other people may have. The grass is not always that much greener on the other side. I was on my way to the office here this morning, and as I passed along the highway, there was a horse pasture to the right with several different sections and a wooden fence dividing off 2 different pastures with horses in each. And when you know, right next to the fence there was one horse with his head through the fence eating from the one side. And there was a horse on that side with his head through the fence eating on the other side. The grass clearly was greener to both of them, not in the pasture they were in, but in the pasture where the other one was. We get that way in our life. We look at the problems around us. We keep our eyes on the problems. We're not keeping our eyes on Jesus Christ, on the ministry, on the gospel, and on our relationship with him. And then last of all, I think too often we're looking at ourself. We get self-involved. We begin to think more highly of ourselves than we ought to think. We begin to look at our perspective, where we're at, things that we're going through, things that we're dealing with, our busy schedules, and we get our priorities out of whack, and we get our perspective sometimes on ourselves, and again, our eyes off of Christ. Paul says, I finished my course. I've run the race. Paul got to the finish line. He was counted faithful in his service. There in 2 Timothy chapter 4, Paul ran the race. He finished it, just as Christ has finished it. The example's been set. The example is not others. It's not the problems that may be around us. It's not all the other things that can take our eyes off of Christ. We must keep our eyes on him. We must keep our eyes on the gospel of Jesus Christ.